The last of the analog sports sedans. That is the way that this vehicle presents itself from a distance. This is the BMW M3, and this, you might remember, is a manual transmission. Historically, it's a match made in heaven. Let's see what it's all about.
The G80 generation BMW M3 has been on sale in Australia since 2021, following a rich lineage of M3 and more recently M4 performance cars. We've already tested both at the Phillip Island Grand Prix circuit, but here we're putting the M3 to the real-world test on ordinary Aussie roads. Sticking with tradition, BMW continues to offer the M3 in manual transmission form, which is completely unique in a sports sedan segment that includes the Mercedes AMG C63 and the Audi RS4 and RS5. Pricing for the manual M3 tested here is set at $145,000 before on-road costs, a $10,000 saving on the more powerful automatic transmission M3 competition.
Now, you've no doubt heard and read about the polarising design of the new G80 M3 and its big kidney grille. I'm going to leave that issue totally alone, but what I will say is that this car really does stand out, and it looks gorgeous in the skin with pumped guards, clean lines, muscular elements everywhere, and it really pops with this wheel and colour combination. There's firepower to match the sporty looks underneath the latest version of BMW's 3-litre twin-turbo inline-6. Now, the manual variant gives away 22 kilowatts and 100 newton meters over the equivalent automatic, and it also has a slower 0 to 100 time of 4.2 seconds. But as I'm about to show you, it's an easy compromise to make on the road. There is something inherently engaging about running an engine through its RPM cycle, learning its idiosyncrasies, and really utilising every ratio to its maximum effect. But that is what the M3 is all about, and in an era of increasing electrification, it really does stand alone as a visceral and really analogue sports car. Now, the manual transmission itself, it is old school, quintessential BMW. There is a little bit of lumpiness in terms of the actual shift, but it falls into the gate cleanly. It has a nice amount of throw, and the clutch take-up is linear and predictable. So you're able to really maximise each ratio as you like on a country road or in daily conveyance alike. The other telling feature with the new BMW M3, even at low speeds, is just the level of precision and accuracy. The steering has a wonderful lightness to it. It never really feels overly assisted. But you go through a corner and there's never any second or third inputs required. You can basically stick with your original input and it just tracks really consistently and faithfully through the corners. The M3 is certainly rich in feedback. As I go along a heavily pockmarked country road, I can feel the individual bits of bitumen being telegraphed through the wheel. The cabin is filled with a little bit of road noise, and the bumps themselves, you can feel exactly what's happening underneath you. That might be seen as a detraction in other cars, but for this kind of car, it all amounts to this really nice, visceral, organic feeling on the road. A car that's rich in feedback, I think it's one of the really important traits of the M3, and this one does it well without overly detracting from the outright comfort of this car.
The M3's adaptive suspension straddles a fine line between comfort and performance, just getting away with being livable enough as a daily driver. Elsewhere, intervention of the driver aids are first class, providing a handy safety net with all the power available. In a similar respect, fuel use from the inline-6 is pretty respectable in regular conveyance, at 11.5 litres per 100 k's in a mix of driving.
Now, onto the good stuff. I have two buttons here on the steering wheel, M1, M2. I'm going to press M2, which straight away adds a little bit more intent to the soundtrack, to the drivetrain itself. a bit more weighting to the steering, and it firms up the adaptive dampers. But importantly, unlike M1, I'm able to do that without switching off a lot of the driver aids. If we pick up the pace a little bit more, this car simply breathes with additional speed. Unlike the predecessor M3, which was prone to being a little bit light switchy in its power applications, there's no sudden burst with this car in terms of the turbocharger intervention. Rather, it's a lot more linear and almost feels like a larger capacity engine, like a V8 with the way it delivers its power. I'm a big fan of that. In terms of the way the car is behaving, I'm going along at a pretty decent clip here, and it's really soaking up all the undulations underneath me. And it feels light. 1,700 kilograms in new car terms is fairly light. No all-wheel drive system in this base variant. Obviously the manual transmission is a little bit lighter than the automatic equivalent as well. And it means that the car hunkers down through corners, it feels light upon braking, it changes direction really well, and it just feels controlled in its movements. The electronic nannies do a lot in the way of keeping it in a straight line. Down low on the rev range particularly, if you're shifting from second to third and you nail it, you're going to see the stability control light blinking quite a bit on the screen, but it makes its interventions quite benignly, and importantly it does so without really detracting from the power delivery. It's a really clever setup. Soundtrack is quintessential BMW, howling inline six, sounds great. On the overrun, bit of crackle, has that beautiful guttural element as well, but nothing overly artificial. I feel like BMW have really focused on making this car as analog as possible, and it really does live up to the brief on the road. Limited slip rear differential in the BMW M3. It works well in really helping you apply down the power. It feels balanced between the rear wheels. And thankfully the Michelin Pilot Sport rubber does its job as well. When this car does move on the road, it's progressive, it's predictable, and there are no unruly movements. Now, just like the vehicle itself, the interior of the new M3 takes a lot of classic BMW elements and then overlays them with the latest design and technology. There's a 10.25-inch center touchscreen display matched by a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster. And while the center fascia itself feels a little bit last generation, in this vehicle I think it's almost appropriate to be staring at an old school bank of dials and switchgear. Now, the interior itself feels appropriately high-end and well furnished. For me, the seats probably lack some of the bolstering and support that regular track day enthusiasts might really expect, but there is an option of $7,500 carbon seats if you're that way inclined. There's so many different points of this cabin that really draw your eye, but for me, this is the centerpiece, the gear shifter itself. It has a really nice old school vibe with it, with the graphic that's on top. A little bit of E30, a little bit of E36 M3, and that in itself is a lineage worth celebrating.
BMW's iDrive infotainment system feels its age in the M3, and we reckon the native menus, particularly in the instrument cluster, aren't as intuitive to navigate as some rival Euro brands. But all in all, the M3 future-proofs itself with enough safety and technology on board, covering all our key metrics where infotainment is concerned, and going close to doing the same with safety, the exception being the cruise control doesn't offer adaptive functionality. Further back, second row seating offers family-friendly proportions. There's not quite as much legroom as the new Mercedes-Benz C-Class, however the area is accessed by separate air vents and USB ports with soft touch materials at all the contact points. Similarly, the 480-litre boot area offers adequate storage for such a performance-focused model. Sadly, however, there's no spare tyre, and although it's hardly front of mind for performance enthusiasts, the M3 falls short of key rivals with a 3-year unlimited kilometre factory warranty. Servicing costs are a little on the pricey side as well, though again, for many that will be a moot point.
It's fair to say the previous generation F80 M3 took a couple of attempts to get it right, but in the end, it was a really enjoyable and really satisfying driver's car. Happily, the new G80 M3 picks up exactly where the old model left off. It's fun, it's engaging, and it bears all the brilliant handling traits that M cars are known for. Light and really visceral on the limit. For me, the manual transmission is the best way to have your M3, and it really does make it the consummate driver's car. This really is the last of the analog sports sedans.